The vast, undulating woods of Pennsylvania in late November possess a raw, unforgiving majesty. Here, the air grows so frigid that every breath feels like inhaling 1,000 tiny shards of glass, stinging the lungs with a cold that defies clothing. Eric Smith, a man whose soul was as hardened as the frozen soil beneath his boots, believed his 20 years of hunting experience made him the undisputed master of these timberlands. But this season, the wilderness was preparing a lesson that would be etched not in trophies, but in blood and bone. Eric was the kind of hunter who viewed the ethical code of the woods as a mere suggestion for the weak. To him, the forest was a vending machine, and he was entitled to the biggest prize by any means necessary. On this particular morning, long before the sun dared to peek over the jagged horizon, he set out for the Black Thicket, a place so dense and shunned by locals that it felt like a relic of a pre-human world. He wasn't carrying just his high-powered rifle. He had bags of illegal chemical lures and salt licks, tools of a cheat intended to bypass the fair chase. His obsession was a creature of myth, the ghost of the ridge. It was a gargantuan 12-point buck, a stag of such unnatural size and intelligence that many believed it was less an animal and more a manifestation of the forest's ancient spirit. For 10 years, it had eluded every snare and every bullet. For Eric, killing it wasn't about the meat or the sport, it was about the ultimate ego trip. He wanted to look at that head on his wall and know he had conquered the unconquerable. As Eric settled into his heated, high-tech tree stand, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the thicket. The usual morning chorus of ravens and the scurry of squirrels vanished instantly, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then a sound emerged from the gloom, the rhythmic, heavy crunch of hooves on frozen crust. The ghost appeared. Its coat was a haunting, silvery grey that seemed to absorb the dim light, and its antlers were like polished ivory spears, but it was the eyes that froze Eric's blood. They weren't the vacant, panicked eyes of a prey animal. They were deep, ancient, and filled with a terrifyingly human-like intelligence. The buck stopped exactly in the center of the clearing and turned its head, looking directly up at Eric's hidden perch. It knew. Eric didn't hesitate. His moral compass had long since demagnetized. He lined up his crosshairs and pulled the trigger. The roar of the .30-06 shattered the silence like a thunderclap. The buck reared back, a spray of crimson painting the pristine snow, and vanished into the darkness of the pines. Eric let out a primal howl of victory. "Got you, you bastard!" He scrambled down from his stand, his pulse racing with a dark adrenaline. He found the blood trail, bright, frothy red against the white. According to the hunter's code, one should track a wounded animal with respect to end its suffering quickly. But Eric tracked with the greed of a scavenger. He followed the red droplets deeper and deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the forest, far beyond the trails he knew, into the treacherous, half-frozen marshlands where the ground groaned underfoot. As the sun began to sink, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow, the temperature plummeted to a lethal degree. Eric suddenly realized the blood trail had vanished. He stood in a clearing he didn't recognize, surrounded by trees that looked like distorted, reaching arms. His phone was a dead brick in his pocket, no signal, no life. His GPS spun in frantic, nonsensical circles. Then came the sound. It wasn't a bleat or a grunt. It was a harrowing, guttural shriek that sounded like a man screaming through a throat full of gravel. Eric spun around, his rifle raised, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who's there?" he screamed into the void. Out of the encroaching darkness, the ghost emerged. It was wounded, yes, a dark, wet hole gaped in its shoulder, but it didn't look weak. It looked vengeful. The creature's movements were no longer animalistic. It moved with a calculated, predatory grace. Eric tried to aim, but the supernatural cold had seized his joints. His fingers were white, numb stumps that refused to pull the trigger. The buck charged. It didn't gully him with its antlers immediately. Instead, it used its massive weight to slam Eric into a tree, knocking the wind and the rifle from his grasp. As Eric lay gasping in the snow, the stag did something truly horrific. It didn't gore him to death. It systematically used its sharp, heavy hooves to crush Eric's legs one by one. The sound of snapping bone echoed through the trees like dry wood breaking. The ghost of the ridge stood over the broken man for a long moment, its hot, metallic-smelling breath clouding in the air. It looked down at him with a gaze of pure, icy judgment, then turned and melted into the shadows, leaving Eric alone in the kingdom of the cold. The night was a descent into a private hell. As the wolves began to howl in the distance, drawn by the scent of his shattered limbs, Eric didn't think about his trophies or his conquests. He thought about every life he had taken without necessity, every rule he had broken out of arrogance. He realized he was no longer the hunter. He was a sacrifice left at the altar of the wild. The forest wasn't just trees and dirt. It was a living, breathing entity that had finally decided to excise a cancer. When the search parties found him the next morning, Eric was a shell of a man, curled in a frozen ball of agony. Both of his legs had to be amputated due to the combined trauma of the crushing injuries and severe frostbite. He never saw his rifle or the silver ghost again. Now, Eric lives his life in a wheelchair, a silent witness to a truth most people are too afraid to acknowledge. Whenever the November wind rattles his windows, he feels that same ancient, judgmental gaze upon him. The lesson is simple, but devastating. Nature does not belong to us. We belong to it. And if you enter the woods with a heart full of malice and a soul without respect, the forest will wait, it will watch, and eventually it will take back what is owed.